Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. Last October, my wife Honey and I rented a small cabin by a lake in northern Minnesota. We had been arguing for months about her long nursing shifts, about my freelance jobs that always paid late, about everything. A therapist suggested we change scenery and talk somewhere the everyday noise couldn't follow us. The listing promised absolute privacy. No roads, no neighbors, just a narrow peninsula that felt like an island. To get there, we had to park at a public dock, load our supplies into a 14-foot aluminum boat, and cross a mile of calm water. It sounded like the reset button we desperately needed, so we booked 5 nights. The first afternoon was promising. The lake was calm and cold, reflecting the yellow birch leaves like a mirror. The cabin was made of simple pine, just 2 rooms and a screened porch. Inside there were propane lamps, a 2-burner stove, and a gasoline backup generator that, according to the owner, we probably wouldn't need. There was no cell signal, but there was an emergency VHF radio and a notebook with the local maps. I joked that it was overkill. Honey smiled wearily, revealing how hard she was trying. We brought 2 coolers of food, bottles of water, a box of winter clothes, and a small toolbox. The owner's note said we had to pull the boat fully onto the beach and tie it to a cedar post, since lake storms could come suddenly. I wrapped the rope twice and secured the motor, then walked along the shore. About 20 meters east, the land narrowed into a swampy arm, and beyond that stretched a dense forest. To the west, across the lake, there was only an unbroken line of trees. It felt like we owned the entire world. That night, we sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, listening to the loons' cries. For the first time, neither of us looked at the clock. When the wind picked up, we went inside and read by lamplight until the propane started to run low. Before sleeping, I looked out at the water. A low cloud covered the moon, but I could still see the faint reflection of the porch bulb and nothing else. It was the most peaceful sight I'd had all year. On the second day, the clouds thickened. We walked along the narrow trail behind the cabin that climbed a hill and looped back down. At the top, we found a half-collapsed lookout platform. The wood was gray and spongy, but the view was clear. Miles of dark water, and in the middle, a tiny speck that looked like a dock on the opposite shore. I assumed it was another cabin, although the listing had said ours was the only one on the lake. I memorized it and then forgot about it. At dusk, the VHF radio announced storm alerts. Strong winds, heavy rain, and possible early snow before dawn. We brought in the firewood and filled pots with water. Honey laughed nervously when I set emergency candles on the table. She said couples therapy had never mentioned hurricane prep. Around 10 p.m., the wind began hitting the walls so hard the glass rattled. Minutes later, the generator kicked on, then sputtered and died with a harsh clatter. Darkness swallowed everything. I checked the fuel with the flashlight, half a tank. The problem was something else. I opened the side panel and saw the pull cord had been yanked twice and left loose, as if someone had tried to start it while we were inside. I brushed off the thought and focused on the rain pounding the roof. We lit candles and tried to sleep. After midnight, I woke to a distant flash. 3 quick blinks, a pause, then 3 more. At first, I thought it was lightning, but the pattern was too precise. I went to the fogged-up window. In the direction where I'd seen that supposed dock, a light flickered, like a flashlight. I shook Honey awake to look. She saw it too. Neither of us said a word. We watched until the light disappeared. Morning revealed the storm's damage. A birch tree blocked the trail. Our boat had drifted and run aground on the rocks. The propeller was cracked and the stern tube dented from being tossed all night. Curiously, the rope was still tied to the cedar post, but the knot was loose, as if someone had untied it and retied it carelessly. The wind alone couldn't explain that. We took inventory. 2 cans of soup and half a loaf of bread were missing. Small things, easy to overlook. but Honey insisted she had packed exact quantities. I found a wet footprint on the porch floor, larger than my hiking boots. Wide heel, no laces. Looked like a rubber fishing boot. I measured it with my hand but said nothing. The VHF radio gave only static. The repeater towers must have gone down. We caught only fragments. We thought about fixing the boat, but the bent propeller shaft was beyond my skills. Paddling a mile in rough waters was possible, but we didn't have proper oars. Just a small plastic one for docking. We decided to stay calm, ration food, and wait for the weather to clear. That afternoon, the flashlight across the lake returned. This time it blinked more slowly. 2 flashes, pause, 1 pause, 2 more. We counted the repetitions until clouds covered the signal. The message was unmistakable. Someone was sending a code. I tried to recall the Morse alphabet, but my nerves got in the way. I convinced myself it might be a stranded camper signaling for help. Still, why not yell or use a boat? We lit a candle on the porch and covered and uncovered it 5 times. No response. We slept poorly. Every creak sounded like a step. At dawn, Honey found clean cuts in the sealed cereal bag. Straight vertical slashes made by a knife, not rodent bites. The coffee jar was open, its beans spilled in a neat line. Whoever entered had taken their time. I explored the shore. In the mud, I found another fresh footprint. The same cross-patterned rubber sole. The track led to the water and stopped. A canoe or kayak leaves no wake, no sound. I stared across the gray lake until freezing rain drove me back. By afternoon, the tension in the cabin was worse than the marital problems that had brought us there. We moved quietly, almost politely, watching opposite windows. I missed our old arguments. They had felt safer than this silence. We agreed on a plan. Fix the propeller enough to cross as soon as the wind calmed. With a saw, I trimmed the damaged blades and sanded the rest. It would push poorly, but it would push. We filled the tank and tried to start it. The motor turned but wouldn't catch. The spark plug wire had been cleanly cut, copper exposed. There was no doubt now. Someone was sabotaging our way out. We hauled the boat completely onto shore and chained it to the cedar post. Honey's voice trembled as she asked what else that stranger might have touched. I checked my toolbox. The small hatchet was gone. Only the hammer and screwdrivers remained. That night, we covered the windows with blankets and stacked chairs against the doors. The flashlight across the lake appeared earlier, before it was fully dark. This time it came from farther down the shore, not from the supposed dock. It blinked once every 3 seconds, steady without pause. My skin prickled at that patient rhythm. Near midnight, the porch boards creaked, followed by a single knock on the door frame, soft, mocking. We held our breath. Then came a second knock and a silence so long I doubted my own hearing. I raised the hammer and stood beside the door, my heartbeat so loud Honey could hear it. There were no more sounds, but the feeling that someone stood inches away on the other side was unbearable. The minutes stretched on, wind shaking the wet leaves, until finally we heard splashing water and the distant scrape of plastic against rock. Unmistakably a kayak landing. We didn't sleep. At dawn, I went outside. The barricade of chairs had been moved aside, though the door was still locked. On the porch railing rested our missing hatchet. Its blade was deeply embedded in the wood, the handle pointing toward the lake like an arrow. Just beneath it, someone had carved letters. "Let's go," Honey whispered. "He thinks we still can." It was worse than a threat. It was advice we knew we couldn't follow. We forced ourselves to eat granola and boil water on the stove. If we rationed, we had 2 days of food left. I climbed the hill again, hoping for cell signal. Nothing. Through the binoculars, I could see the opposite shore clearly. The dock wasn't one. It was a collapsed boathouse, half sunken. Beside it stood a rusty trailer and an old truck with flat tires. I watched for movement. Nothing. I decided we had to cross on foot. The lake water was 45 degrees Fahrenheit, 7 degrees Celsius. Swimming a mile was nearly suicidal, but we had wetsuits for paddleboarding. In calm conditions, we could use the boat as a raft and push it along. Honey agreed. Fear had turned into determination. We spent hours clearing the beach and making improvised paddles from cabinet doors. When we dragged the boat to the water, we found 2 new holes, thumb-sized, right at the waterline. Fresh splinters still hung from the edges. Whoever did it had been there while we prepared, just yards away. Honey let out a strangled sob, then fell silent. I patched the holes with the duct tape and a piece of plastic cut from the cooler lid. Maybe it would hold long enough. We set the plan. Leave at dawn with the faintest light, hoping the predator slept by night. By evening, fog settled low, muffling every sound. No flashlight appeared. The silence felt strange, like before an ambush. We packed our bags, dressed in layers, and slept in shifts. At 3:07 a.m., the porch steps creaked under steady weight. Honey shook me just as glass shattered in the kitchen window. I grabbed the hammer. She raised the VHF radio like a club. We backed toward the bedroom. A beam of light swept across the room once, then went dark. The wooden floor groaned with slow, deliberate steps. "We're armed." "Get out now," I shouted, my voice cracking. The steps stopped for a few seconds, then continued, closer. The bedroom had no lock. We shoved a dresser against the door, and I aimed the hammer at knee height, ready to strike if the intruder broke through. Silence returned. We waited, breathing unevenly. Minutes later, the front door slammed, followed by retreating steps on the porch and the scraping of hulls being dragged over sand. I pulled the blanket from the window. In the moonlight, I saw a figure pushing a kayak into the water. He wore a dark raincoat and an unlit headlamp. For an endless moment, he turned toward the cabin, and I saw his face. Gray beard, sunken cheeks, empty eyes. He lifted my propane lamp, the one that had vanished, and smashed it against the rocks, scattering sparks as it went dark. Then he paddled into the fog. That was when we acted. In 10 frantic minutes, we loaded our backpacks into the boat, pushed it into the lake, and began paddling with our improvised oars. The patched holes leaked, but slowly. The fog hid the shore behind us. We aimed straight ahead, gauging a distance by the faint outlines of pines. Halfway across, an engine roared to life, small but getting closer by the second. He had a hidden motorboat. The hum grew louder. I paddled furiously. The boat rocked under our weight. Water reached my ankles. A flashlight beam sliced through the fog to our left. The boat appeared, fiberglass hull, sputtering outboard motor, heading straight for our stern. I passed the paddle to Honey and raised the hammer. The stranger closed in to 20 feet. The motor choked, then died. The momentum carried him closer. He stood on the bow, holding the hatchet again. "Give me the backpacks," he rasped, his voice like gravel, "and I'll tow you." I shook my head. He stepped forward, ready to jump. I hurled the hammer. It spun through the air and splashed into the water, missed but distracted him just enough. He shifted his weight, and the boat tilted. Water flooded in. He lost his balance and vanished beneath the surface. Silence, except for our ragged breathing. The boat drifted aimlessly. We never saw his head resurface. Ripples spread outward. The fog swallowed everything. We paddled the last 100 meters to the collapsed boathouse, beached the hull in the mud, stumbled ashore, and collapsed trembling. Dawn slowly tinted the sky until it was full light. We ventured inland. We found a cabin even smaller than ours, its door hanging by a hinge. Inside was unsettling chaos. Broken coolers, open backpacks, scattered cameras and wallets. Among the debris were IDs dating back as far as 10 years. On a shelf sat jars labeled with coins and keys, trophies arranged by season. A trail behind the shack led to a logging road, which eventually opened onto a paved highway, where we managed to flag down a car. State police took our statements for hours. Divers combed the lake but found no body, not that day or the next. They did find the motorboat, 4 meters down, its propeller tangled in fishing line. The detective guessed our pursuer had been caught in his own trap. Honey and I never returned for our belongings. We hired lawyers, canceled the rental contract, and holed up in a chain hotel in Duluth until family sent us plane tickets home. Curiously, our marriage felt lighter. Real fear had burned away small resentments. In the reports, the suspect was called the Hermit of the Boundary, linked to 2 missing kayakers from the previous spring. But without a body or confession, it all remained conjecture. The sheriff told us, cold water hides evidence for years. Sometimes on quiet nights, I still hear in my mind the faint flicker of that flashlight, a code I never managed to decipher. And I can't help imagining that intermittent glow beneath the dark water, still trying to send signals to someone on the other side of an empty lake. Story 2. I'm not someone who scares easily. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and I was already used to dealing with unsettling neighbors and nighttime noises. Old houses creak, the wind howls. It's part of life. But what happened at that lake house in Maine last summer was something else. Something I'll never be able to forget, no matter how hard I try. My name is Emily, and this is my story. It all started when I realized I had to get away. My ex Jake wouldn't leave me alone. We'd been separated for 6 months, but he kept texting me, calling me, even showing up at my apartment without warning. At first they were minor annoyances, drunken messages, bouquets of flowers I didn't want. But then it got worse. He started leaving notes on my car with phrases like, "I know you miss me." Once I found a cigarette butt under my bedroom window, still warm, as if he'd been there watching me sleep. I got a restraining order, but it didn't stop him. The police told me there wasn't much they could do unless he physically harmed me. That was when I understood I had to leave. I found the lake house on a rental app. It was in a tiny town called Milanino in Maine, a few hours north of Portland. The photos showed a cozy A-frame cabin right on Ambages Lake, surrounded by pines and with a dock that stretched out into the water. It looked peaceful, isolated, just what I needed. The listing said it had Wi-Fi, a security system with cameras and no neighbors within half a mile. Perfect. I booked it for a month, packed my bags, and drove from Ohio in my old Honda Civic. The trip took 2 days. When I arrived, the cabin was even prettier than in the photos. The air smelled of pine and lake water, and the only sounds were birds and the gentle lapping of the waves. The house was small but clean, living room, kitchen, a loft as a bedroom, and a large window with a view of the lake. The owner had left me a note with instructions for the security system, a couple of outdoor cameras, one at the main entrance, another near the dock, and a motion sensor light. For the first time in months, I felt safe. The first few days were wonderful. I got up early, made coffee, and sat on the dock with my journal. I was trying to plan my next step, maybe move to another city, start over. Jake hadn't sent any messages since I left Ohio, and I started to believe he had finally left me alone. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my best friend Sarah. I needed to disappear for a while. But on the 4th night, something felt off. I was in the loft reading when I heard a faint dragging sound downstairs, like a chair being moved across the wooden floor. I froze listening, but there was nothing else. I told myself it was just the cabin settling. Old houses make noises, right? I went down slowly, turned on the lights, and checked every corner. Nothing. But one of the kitchen chairs was slightly out of place, turned toward the window. I could have sworn I'd left it tucked under the table. I put it back, locked the doors, and double-checked the windows. Everything was secure. The next morning, I noticed something else. The large window facing the lake had a mark, as if someone had pressed a hand against the glass. It hadn't been there the day before. I had cleaned the windows myself because they were streaked from the rain. The handprint was high, too high for an animal, and it looked intentional, as if someone had been looking in. My stomach tightened. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe a bird, a branch, but it didn't feel like that. That night I checked the security system recordings in the app connected to the cameras. The system saved clips every time the sensor detected movement, so I went through them. Most were just deer or raccoons passing by, but one, timestamped 2:17 a.m., froze my blood. It was from the front door camera. A figure crossed the frame too quickly to make out details, but it was undoubtedly human. Wearing a dark hoodie, head down, disappearing into the trees before the camera could capture more. I played it over and over, zooming in, but the image was too blurry to see a face. I called the local police the next morning. An officer named Daniels came to the cabin, a middle-aged man with a pronounced Maine accent. I showed him the video and the mark on the glass. He watched the clip with a frown but didn't seem very concerned. Could be a kid messing around, he said, or a lost hiker. This area is pretty remote, but sometimes we get curious folks. I told him about Jake, the restraining order, everything. He wrote it down but said the recording wasn't clear enough to identify anyone and that without a direct threat, there wasn't much he could do. He suggested keeping the doors locked and calling them if anything else happened. I felt dismissed, but I thanked him and he left. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the house made me jump. I kept my phone next to me and the security app open, checking the live feed every few minutes. Around midnight, the motion light on the dock snapped on. I grabbed my phone and opened the camera. Nothing. Just the dock, the lake, and the trees swaying in the wind. But then I saw it. A shadow moving just outside the camera's reach, at the edge of the light. It was there for a second and then it was gone. I stayed up until dawn, too scared to close my eyes. The next day I decided I couldn't stay. I started packing, tossing clothes into my luggage. I planned to drive to Portland, find a hotel, and decide what to do. As I was putting things in the suitcase, I noticed my car keys weren't on the counter where I'd left them. I tore the house apart, checked drawers, the couch, even the fridge. Nothing. That was when I started to panic. Had someone been inside? I checked the recordings again, but there were no new clips. The cameras hadn't detected anything since the shadow on the dock. I called Sarah, breaking my own rule about not telling anyone where I was. I told her everything. The chair, the mark, the figure on the camera. She told me to leave immediately and offered to book me a hotel in Portland. While we were talking, I heard a faint beeping under the couch. I froze. It sounded like an electronic chirp, a low battery alert. I knelt and reached underneath. My fingers touched something small and plastic. I pulled it out. It was a GPS tracker, the kind you stick on a car or hide in a bag. A tiny red light was blinking. My heart stopped. Jake. It had to be him. He'd been tracking me this whole time. That's how he knew where I was. I grabbed the phone and called the police again. Officer Daniels came back, this time with another officer. I showed them the tracker, explained how Jake had been stalking me for months. This time they took it seriously. They bagged the device as evidence. They asked for Jake's description and sent an alert to other officers in the area. But they still didn't have enough to arrest him. The video was too vague and the tracker wasn't registered in his name. They told me to stay at the cabin while they patrolled the area. Stay? Not a chance. I'd had enough. I asked the owner, who lived an hour away, for the spare key and started loading the car. As I carried the suitcase to the driveway, I saw something in the gravel. A fresh cigarette butt of the same brand Jake smoked. My hand shook as I picked it up. He had been there, not just lurking in the trees, but right by my car. I threw my things in the trunk and sat behind the wheel. That's when I saw it. Tucked under the windshield wiper was a folded piece of paper. My mouth went dry. I took it and opened it. In Jake's messy handwriting it said, "You can't hide from me, Em." I dropped the note as if it burned. My eyes swept the trees, the lake, the road. Was he watching me at that very moment? I started the car and tore out of the driveway. The gravel crunched under the tires. My phone was vibrating nonstop. Messages from Sarah, a missed call from the police. But I didn't stop to look. I just drove, heart pounding, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds. The road was narrow, winding through dense forest, and it was starting to get dark. About 10 miles out, I saw lights behind me, at first far away, then closer. Too close. I sped up, but the car kept pace. It was an old, rusty pickup, just like the one Jake drove. I floored it, pushing my Civic to its limit. The truck stuck to me, high beams blinding me in the mirror. I fumbled for the phone and dialed 911. The operator told me to stay calm and keep driving toward the Molonac station. I was crying, screaming that it was him, that it was Jake. The truck drew closer and I could see the driver's silhouette, hoodie head down, just like the figure on the camera. Suddenly, the truck slowed and turned onto a side road. The lights vanished among the trees. I kept driving, shaking until I saw the lights of Milanino. I pulled into the police station lot and collapsed over the steering wheel, sobbing. The officers took my statement and I showed them the note. They sent a patrol to the cabin and to the side road where the truck had turned off, but they found nothing. No truck, no Jake. That night they escorted me to a hotel in Portland. I didn't sleep. Every hallway noise made me jump, thinking he had found me again. The next day the police called. They had traced the GPS to a store in Ohio, purchased with Jake's credit card. They detained him for questioning, but he denied everything. Said he hadn't left Ohio, that he had an alibi with a friend. The investigation continued, but without more evidence they couldn't hold him. I moved to a new city after that. Changed my number, deleted my social media, started over. I still check my car for trackers, lock the doors 3 times and sleep with a bat by the bed. I don't know if it was Jake in that truck or if he was ever at the lake cabin, but I know he was close. Too close. And the worst part is that I'll never feel safe again. Story 3. I will tell this story exactly as I remember it. My name is Daniel, and last October my fiancée Jenna and I rented a small cabin in the Adirondacks for a long-promised weekend away from work and city noise. We drove up from Albany in the afternoon and arrived before dark, carrying our bags through cold air that smelled of pine needles and wet leaves. The house sat at the end of a narrow gravel road, the only property in a quiet cove. The water lapped gently against the dock, and in the distance we could hear the loon's wails echoing across the surface. It felt private, maybe too private, but that was exactly what we were looking for. Inside, everything was tidy, if basic. Pine walls, 2 small bedrooms, a stone fireplace, and windows facing the lake. We unpacked, cooked pasta, and ate at the small table as the light outside faded. By 9, the shoreline was a black mirror and the forest traced an even darker silhouette against the sky. Cell service was weak, and the house Wi-Fi barely showed 1 bar. We loved it. There were no constant notifications, so we left our phones charging in the kitchen and opened a bottle of Coca-Cola. At 10, a steady rain began, drumming on the shingles and splashing the lake, masking any other sound. We bundled under a blanket on the sofa and sat watching the flames in the fireplace. Near midnight, drowsy from food and drink, we decided to go to bed. We checked the doors. Both the front and back had only simple deadbolts, no slide bolts. Then we climbed the narrow staircase to the main bedroom. A small window on the landing looked out over the gravel road, but the rain and darkness hid everything beyond the porch light. I woke at 2:17 a.m. to a muffled sound. At first I thought it was thunder, but the rain had already stopped. Jenna was still asleep beside me. I stayed still, listening. A board creaked downstairs, slow, deliberate. My heart pounded. The noise came again, closer to the kitchen than to the living room, as if someone were testing their weight on the floor. I slid out of bed and moved to the bedroom door, easing it open. The house felt colder. A thin strip of moonlight came in through the staircase window, but below darkness reigned. I heard a soft scrape, then a low murmur. 2 male voices, tense. I couldn't make out the words, but I understood. Intruders. I shut the door quickly, secured it, and shook Jenna awake. She bolted upright when I whispered, "There's someone downstairs." We shoved the old dresser against the door. It weighed about 75 pounds, and the wooden floor squealed as we dragged it, noise they surely heard. Immediately, footsteps ran up the stairs. A voice whispered, "There are people up here." Another answered, "We can still grab things. Just quick." We backed up to the far wall. Only that piece of furniture and a flimsy door separated us from them. There was no direct exit. The bedroom windows looked down a drop of nearly 5 meters onto rocks. I opened the nightstand drawer. Nothing useful. Then I remembered my phone was downstairs, along with Jenna's. There was no way to call for help. A fist hit the door. "Open up." The voice sounded cracked, more nervous than threatening. Jenna gripped my arm. I shouted, "The police are on their way." It was a lie, but it bought us a few seconds of silence. Then someone muttered to the other and kicked. The door shuddered. The frame groaned, though the latch held. Then a third voice spoke, deeper, calmer. "Leave it. We're not going to hurt them. Grab what's near the exit." The younger one shot back, "We need money. They must have wallets upstairs." There was another scuffle and a kick. Wood splintered at the hinge. Jenna swore under her breath. I searched desperately for something heavy. I grabbed the metal lamp, unplugged it, and raised it like a weapon. The next blow tore the hinge loose. The dresser blocked the bottom, but up top, a gap opened. A face appeared. Wild eyes, rain jacket hood still on. He froze when he saw me with the lamp raised. We stared at each other for 2 endless seconds. Behind him, someone murmured, "I told you it was occupied." His expression shifted from surprise to regret. He backed away. We heard them arguing in whispers on the landing. They didn't sound like seasoned criminals, more like scared kids out of their depth. But desperation makes people dangerous. They went back down. Through the crack, we heard ragged breathing, drawers sliding open, curses, then clearer phrases. "You said nobody rents this place in the off-season. Last week it was empty. If we leave with nothing, we can't pay S what we owe." Another replied, "Shut up and grab the electronics." I understood. Small-time thieves, probably locals in debt. That name, Esso, sounded like someone waiting on their money. I pictured drug trouble in a small town. Even so, they were still inside and we were trapped without a phone. Jenna whispered, "I saw a landline on the living room console when we dropped the bags." I remembered an old beige cordless. If it worked, we could call 911, but we'd have to get past them to reach it. We waited. Maybe they'd scoop things up and leave. 15 minutes dragged by. We heard silverware clinking, as if they were stealing anything easy to pawn. One cursed again. It's not enough. Their steps headed toward the back door. For a moment I thought they'd go, but they came back to the stairs. The older voice said, "Last chance." They might have cash upstairs. Jenna pointed at the window. I shook my head. The drop was too high. We needed to deter them. I opened the closet. Nothing useful except a travel iron. Useless. Then I remembered the flare gun I'd brought for kayaking trips. It was in my bag under the clothes. I loaded it. It wasn't a real weapon, but it could intimidate. When the footsteps pounded up the stairs again, I aimed at the gap. Jenna knelt beside me with the lamp. The younger voice said, "Listen, pass your wallets through the door and we'll go." "Back off," I shouted. "I'm armed." Silence, then a nervous laugh. "Liar." I half pulled the trigger. The safety clicked and an orange spark flickered in the barrel. "The first one's a flare, the second is real," I bluffed, doubling down. The hallway fell silent. The older voice, weary, said, "Kid, they mean it." "Let's go." Uncertain footsteps. The younger one groaned, "If we leave, we're dead." S doesn't forgive. A smack sounded like a slap. "Stop talking about S," the older one ordered. At last they went down again. We breathed easier. Outside, water dripped. Dawn was still far off. The flare gun was heavy in my hands. Jenna whispered, "If they go, we run to the car." I nodded. A crash downstairs cut the plan short. They were smashing something, breaking glass. The older man shouted, "Enough. You're making too much noise." Then a sob. "I don't want to go back to jail," one cried. While they argued, I pictured the layout of the house. The phone was about 20 feet from the stairs on the living room console. If we could get there without being seen, we could call for help before they reacted. We inched the dresser aside and slipped into the hallway. The floor creaked even under careful steps. We paused at the top of the stairs. Below, in the faint glow of the stove clock, I could make out two figures. One crouched rifling drawers, the other pacing with his hands on his head, both with their backs to us. We went down the first step. It squealed. The pacing one stopped and turned his head toward the sound. I raised the flare gun. His eyes glinted beneath the hood. He looked young, barely in his 20s, with a tired, frightened gaze. In a broken voice, he said, "Please, we just need money. Nobody has to get hurt." His partner, older by maybe 10 years, turned slowly. His cheeks were hollow and he carried a bulging sack of small items. Jenna muttered, "Leave. Take what you've got and go." My voice shook, but it sounded firm. We already called the police. Another lie, but the younger one flinched. The older man studied us, then nodded to his partner. "Time to go." They moved toward the back door. At that instant, headlights lit up the front windows, two beams cutting across the wall. A car was turning into the gravel drive. We all froze. The younger one cursed. "Who is it?" He ran to the window, pulled the curtain aside, and exclaimed, "It's the police." He bolted for the porch. The older one hesitated, looked at us one last time, and followed him. We didn't wait. We ran to the living room console, grabbed the landline handset, and dialed 911. The calm voice of the operator steadied me. I read her the address from the rental agreement stuck to the fridge. While I spoke, Jenna peered through the picture window. "They left on foot," she murmured. Red and blue lights flashed along the road as a sheriff's car slid in on the wet gravel. Two officers got out with weapons drawn, scanning. I waved from the window and then met them on the porch. Breathless, we told them everything. They searched the house and confirmed the intruders had escaped into the woods. We spent 2 hours giving statements as more units arrived. One officer found muddy footprints leading toward a cluster of rundown cabins on the far side of the lake. He mentioned there had been a recent uptick in break-ins because a local paper mill had closed, leaving dozens unemployed. Some were resorting to theft to make rent. They suspected the two from that night were part of that group. By dawn, the house looked like a crime scene. Fingerprint powder on the drawers, police radios crackling, our half-open suitcases on the floor. The officers secured the place and suggested we finish the weekend at a hotel in town. We agreed without hesitation. That afternoon, in a roadside diner with burnt coffee, a detective called us. They had arrested the intruders near an old logging road. One was 21, the other 33. Both lived 30 miles to the south, unemployed for months. The younger had a record for petty theft. The older had none. They confessed, explaining they chose vacant vacation homes because owners took longer to report. They swore they never meant to hurt anyone, only to scare us into handing over money when they realized we were there. I felt a chill hearing it. Part of me pitied them. Another part wanted them behind bars. Jenna, more compassionate, murmured, "They're victims of something too." Even so, the fear from that night wouldn't fade soon. We cut the trip short and drove home, silent for long stretches of highway. Every time the headlights washed over the trees, I remembered the instant I knew we weren't alone. Weeks later, I was still waking in the middle of the night, hearing footsteps that weren't there. Months passed, and eventually the court sentenced the younger one to 2 years in prison and the older to probation and community service. The report said both had cooperated, admitted guilt, and asked for a second chance. I wonder if they'll be able to rebuild their lives. I wonder if, in their place, I would have made different choices. I want to believe I would, but desperation twists judgment. People ask me why I keep telling this story, because danger isn't always a dark figure among the trees. Sometimes it's an ordinary neighbor pushed too far by circumstances. That's what truly keeps me up at night. The thin line between safety and desperation, and how quickly a quiet lakeside cabin can turn into a battleground when that line is crossed.